This happened when I was 15 years old. It was late, around 1:45 a.m. I was in my loft bedroom trying to get some sleep like any normal teenager at such an hour. I remember staring at the ceiling trying to drift off to sleep. I used to get these nightmares frequently, so it was hard for me to fall asleep a lot of nights. My parents' room was on the opposite side of the house, far away from my loft. I heard some loud arguing noises coming from the general direction of my parents' room, and I thought that maybe they were fighting about something again. So I pulled the blanket over my head, and I tried to block it out. Before long, I peeked up from under my blanket, hoping that they were done arguing. It was quiet, so I thought we were in good shape, and I was free to try to sleep again. I laid there for a few minutes, blanket pulled down this time. It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes later that I heard the front door being kicked open. I froze, completely paralyzed with fear. I knew there was something wrong and that we might be in some serious trouble. All the thoughts I had about my parents arguing might not have even been what was actually happening, but I really didn't care about that anymore though. I cared about the stranger in our house. I hoped my parents would hear the commotion and wake up, and that this would all be over soon. I thought about climbing down to wake my parents, and then I heard some footsteps walking slowly, coming from downstairs. It sounded like whoever it was wearing sneakers. I was hoping it was one of my parents, but I knew it wasn't. I can still imagine every time their foot hit the wood floor of our hallway. Every second that passed by, I thought that at any minute they were going to come for me. I barely had a means of protection, so I hid behind my dresser. Suddenly the person stopped. They must have been standing still, probably trying to figure out their next move, which at this point, I realized I should probably try to stay silent, because any noise was just going to alert them of my position. For those of you wondering why my parents didn't wake up, it was a Sunday night, and my parents were high on some kind of substances. They were completely unresponsive. So now here I am, alone in my loft with a random person, knowing exactly where I'm at, presumably. I was absolutely positive that I was going to be a victim of violence or trafficking, just like those scary movies. I was unbelievably terrified. Also because one of my parents' vehicles was parked outside, they knew there were people at home. Only someone with a specific purpose breaks into a house when they know the homeowner is home. It had to be something personal, or at the very least, they had to be armed with something dangerous. Moments later, I heard someone starting to climb the ladder to my loft. Every step they took up those stairs felt like a slow, excruciating death. I was frozen in fear, pretending to be asleep. I saw that they were carrying a gun as they reached the top. They stood there watching me for what felt like an eternity, telling me to stay silent or there would be consequences. I recognized the voice. It was the same drug dealer who had dealt with my parents before, someone who had been to the house a couple of times, usually late at night when they thought I was asleep. They said they were here to collect a debt, and that this was just a warning. They ransacked the house, taking whatever things of value they could find. Like my dad's work laptop, some of my mom's jewelry, including her wedding ring, which he took right off her finger, and some other electronics before leaving. My parents stayed completely unconscious through the entire ordeal. I called the police as soon as the intruder left, and they arrived about 30 minutes later. They questioned me for nearly an hour, mostly about my parents and the kind of people who visited our home. It was obvious they were more interested in my living situation than in catching the man who broke in. One of the officers quietly took photos of the state of the house, while the others spoke with me. Later that week, someone from Child Protective Services showed up at school and pulled me out of class. They asked if I felt safe at home and if I had any relatives I could stay with. I didn't tell them everything, but I said enough for them to get involved. Within days, I was placed with my grandma while they opened a case against my parents. Nothing ever came of the investigation into the break-in itself, but I think that was the point. The man who came into our house wasn't just a thief. He was there to send a message. My parents owed money, and he used me to get their attention. I need to share something that happened a few years back that still bothers me. When I was 20 years old, I was living a pretty normal life. I was in my second year of university when this happened. I had always been into all things horror. I never seemed to be afraid of much, and I was very protective of my girlfriend Zoe, who I was skeptical about when she described her experiences. I thought of myself as someone who could handle anything scary without flinching. I would often watch the most disturbing horror films just to prove I could take it. My girlfriend Zoe suffered from trauma-related sleep episodes that she'd been dealing with since childhood. She told me many times how different triggers or environmental factors could influence her episodes and turn them into either peaceful dreams with pleasant images or terrifying nightmares that felt completely real. She described seeing figures standing at the foot of her bed that weren't really there. Sometimes she would even feel like someone was sitting on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Being the light sleeper I am, I saw no chance of it occurring to me, so I kind of just let it go right over my head. I would often dismiss her concerns, thinking she was just being dramatic about ordinary nightmares. One night, Zoe called me in a panic and asked me to come over as she had just suffered another so-called evil experience due to her sleep condition. She lived about 20 minutes away by car, and I drove over immediately despite the late hour. When I arrived, I found her asleep again, seemingly peacefully. Her apartment was dark except for a small lamp in the corner of her bedroom. I took a seat on her desk chair right by the window and started scrolling through my phone. The room was eerily quiet, except for the occasional car passing by outside. 30 minutes or so went by, and I figured she was peacefully asleep, and it would probably be okay for me to leave as long as I let her know that I stopped by as she requested. I wrote her a note explaining that I had come by to check on her, but she seemed fine. But suddenly Zoe awoke and started screaming. This was a different kind of scream though, a type of scream I had never heard before, especially from her. It was almost mumbled, I don't know how else to describe it. Her eyes bulged open, and I ran over to her side. I asked her if she was having a bad dream. She started shaking violently under her blankets. I grabbed a hold of her to try to calm her down, but the tremors grew stronger. Her entire body was rigid, and her eyes were darting around the room as if tracking something. I asked her what was going on, but no response came from her trembling lips. I figured this was just another one of her trauma-related sleep episodes that she had described to me before. I did my best to comfort her by holding her hand and telling her everything was okay. After about 30 or so seconds went by, she regained full control of her body and stopped trembling. She seemed disoriented but calmer than before. I made sure she was okay, and I left for my house as it was around 11:30 at night because I had an early morning exam that I couldn't miss. The drive back was quiet, and I thought about how strange her episodes really were. Right as I got home, I missed a few urgent calls from her that had come in while I was driving. I tried calling her back immediately, but no response came from her end. I left several voicemails asking if she was okay and if she needed me to come back. After about 5 minutes went by with no word from her, I took it upon myself to head back over to her place. I was worried something serious might have happened since she had never called me so many times in a row before. When I arrived, I noticed several police cars parked in front of her house with their headlights still on. My heart started racing as I parked my car on the street. I ran up to her house desperately trying to find out what happened to Zoe. As I approached the house, I noticed Zoe running toward me, tears streaming down her face. An officer in uniform walked over to us with a notepad in hand. What I found out still bothers me to this day and makes me question everything I thought I knew about fear. Apparently, when I had gone over to Zoe's that night, she wasn't asleep at all like I had thought. She was pretending to be calm while terrified because she had seen something that scared her. Evidently, right behind me was a man hiding inside her wardrobe the entire time I was there. He had been watching her through the partially open doors, while I sat completely unaware. The police also found duct tape and rope left inside the wardrobe, which the man had abandoned in his rush to escape. The theory to this day is Zoe thought she was having an episode, when in reality, this very real man was quietly watching her in her bedroom from inside her wardrobe. Her brain couldn't distinguish between her usual sleep episodes and the real danger present that night. Supposedly, when I had entered her house, it was enough to keep the man hidden, because someone, that would be me, unexpected had arrived at her apartment. My presence might have prevented him from doing whatever he had planned to do. She told the officer she had spotted movement from her wardrobe after I left, and immediately ran to the bathroom, locking the door behind her before calling the police. The police arrived about 20 to 30 minutes later, only moments before I returned to her place. Unfortunately, the man escaped through her bedroom window and down the fire escape before officers arrived. I realized that night I'm not as fearless as I thought when faced with real danger instead of movie screens. What happened makes me thankful, but I still feel disturbed whenever I think about it. I keep wondering what might have happened if I hadn't gone over there that night at all. This happened about 6 years ago when I was a college student. I lived alone in a small apartment above a shop in a sketchy neighborhood in Toronto. The area was known for break-ins and other crimes, including theft. Despite the area's reputation, I wasn't particularly concerned because I thought nothing would happen to me. I was young and naive back then. I had a 3-year-old husky that I loved dearly and had raised since he was a puppy. It was a Friday night, and I was relaxing at home, watching movies on my laptop and enjoying the quiet evening with my dog. Around 7 p.m., I texted my aunt to let her know I was staying home for the weekend, as I sometimes stayed at her place on weekends. I eventually went to bed around 11 p.m., and it felt like I'd barely slept when I was awakened by the sound of the back door being forced open, followed by footsteps rushing down the hallway. The first thing I did was grab my iPhone and call my aunt. She was listed as my emergency contact, so her number came up right away. I was just hoping she would wake up from the call. I then dropped the phone between the headboard and mattress in case my aunt answered so she could hear what was happening. I had barely done that when the first intruder burst through the bedroom door. I could see his silhouette, and he was clearly holding a screwdriver in his hand. When he saw me, he raised it and came toward me. Anyone familiar with Canadian crime rates knows that home invasions can be extremely violent and dangerous. People get seriously injured or worse if they resist or don't cooperate with intruders. But instinctively, I pulled my legs back when he approached, and when he came within reach, I kicked both legs out as hard as I could. I'm a small woman, 5 feet 5 inches, and at that time I weighed about 100 pounds with a slim build. But I had been training in Muay Thai kickboxing for nearly 4 years. The self-defense classes were something my dad insisted on before I moved out on my own. My kick connected with the guy, causing him to stumble backward and hit the wall. Fortunately, the screwdriver fell from his hand. Before he could recover, I jumped on him, driving my knee into his face and slamming his head against the wall. I knew my survival depended on it, so I used all my strength. The guy collapsed immediately, but before I could get up, I saw a second intruder standing in the doorway, holding a taser. It felt like all the blood drained from my body, and I went numb. I remember thinking, maybe irrationally, that if he hurt me, I would rather die than be disabled or dependent on anyone who would have to care for me for the rest of my life. He stood there with the taser pointed at my chest for what seemed like forever, but realistically was probably less than 10 seconds. I didn't move, and he eventually told me in broken English to get on the bed, face down. I was terrified, but figured if he wanted to kill me, he would have done it already. So I followed his instructions. He threw a blanket over me, and I curled into a fetal position with my back against the wall, positioning my legs and arms in front to protect my body, in case they tried to attack me. I heard a third intruder enter the room, and they began speaking in some foreign language to each other. I couldn't understand what they were saying, and I didn't recognize the language at all. One intruder tried to help the man I had knocked down while the other ransacked the apartment, shoving my laptop and other valuables into a large bag. Around this time, I heard a couple of cars approaching rapidly. The cars stopped directly in front of the building, and I heard some people shouting. It was my aunt and two older nephews in the other car who lived nearby. The intruders panicked and ran out the back door, trying to escape through the alley. One of my nephews confronted them with a baseball bat, and the other had a crowbar, causing them to scatter in different directions. I rushed downstairs to meet them, and my aunt had called the police while she was on her way. I met them at the front door, and I went to my auntie's car to wait for the police. It took them about 30 minutes to arrive. They claimed they were busy with another call. By then, I had calmed down somewhat and realized my husky was nowhere to be found. I took a flashlight from my aunt and began searching the surrounding area, looking in the alley behind the building and checking nearby dumpsters for any sign of my dog. The husky was nowhere to be found. We searched for hours but couldn't locate him. The police arrived and were surprisingly thorough, checking for fingerprints and taking detailed statements from both of us. By the time they finished, it was starting to get light outside, and my aunt drove me back to her place since I didn't feel safe staying in my apartment. And my nephews drove back to their home. Only then did I hear my aunt's side of the story. She explained that she answered my call only to hear shouting and what sounded like a struggle, and when I didn't respond, she immediately left her apartment and rushed over, using her work phone to call my nephews on the way, and then calling the police. My aunt arrived quickly, and she stayed on the line the entire time, only hanging up when she reached the building.